Hi, this is Gamba tutorial number 15 and the third in my mini-series of French Baroque viol ornamentation videos. This video is going to be about one of the most common and actually one of the easiest French viol ornaments, specifically the Battement. And this ornament appears really in every piece you care to mention by Marais, Forqueray, Dolé, you name them, they used the Battement. And it's essentially the same, or the equivalent of the modern mordent. So you play the written note, then the note below the written note, and then the written note again in quick succession. Really straightforward, and it is fairly straightforward in historical terms, but this particular ornament was really quite a flexible one. It appears in almost every piece, as I say, but also in quite a few different contexts, which affects the way you play it. Annoyingly, almost every French writer on this subject uses a different term to a different name for the ornament, but they all use more or less exactly the same symbol. So for Marais, whose system of notation and ornamentation really became the standard, it was a battement, either with two T's or with one T, and he writes it with a cross, a little X. For Demachy and Jean Rousseau, they called it the martèlement, and they also use a cross, either an X or a little plus sign. And Danovy, somewhat more confusingly, calls it the pincé, which, as we looked at in the last video, is what Marais called the one-finger vibrato. So that's a bit confusing. In this video, I'm just going to stick with Marais' terminology, so it will be a battement. The only problem for us as modern players is figuring out exactly what is meant by, or at least how one should play the battement in a given situation. So it can appear on very long notes, notably at the beginning of very sort of impassioned pieces of music. It can also appear in much more as a sort of much more transitory ornament in very fast passages. It can appear in crotchet passages, in quaver passages, and even sometimes in semi-quaver passages. So clearly, this ornament can be played very quickly. But how do we approach it when we find it on very, very long notes in the context of slow music? Well, again, Marais doesn't really have very much to say, or actually has nothing to say about how this battement is performed. But luckily, his contemporaries and predecessors do indeed describe this ornament and how to play it. So we have to rely on them for an explanation. The fact that it appears on both very long notes and very short notes suggests that it can be played very quickly or potentially in a much more extended manner. And Demachy, for example, specifies, he says that it's played by raising the finger from the note or the letter as soon as it's been played with the bow and putting it back down at once. And he says that there is such a thing as the double martèlement, the double battement, and he says it's made in the same way except that it's doubled. So presumably by this he means that you can play, but you can also play. So this gives us some explanation as to how Marais might have wanted the battement to be performed in long notes. Danovy also writes about this ornament. He calls it the pincé, but he says the pincé is done with an abrupt agitation by putting the finger back on the fret after taking it off. The number of strikes is to be governed by the value of the notes, and it's marked with a little cross. So, and additionally, Rousseau adds that that the battement is closer and faster than the cadence or the trill, and it comes to rest on the fret, and that's very important. Etienne Lullier provides a table explaining their performance, and in fact he adds he has the single and the double and also the triple battement. So clearly for Lullier, it can be a very, very long ornament as well. So if we return to some of these examples of music with the battement in fast passages, but also in slow passages, we can start to understand how it might be performed. For very quick passages, the ornament is clearly intended to be quite a fast ornament. And in fact, Bénigne de Bassilly compares a vocal ornament called the tour de gaussier, which is a sort of a very fast catching in the throat, almost like a sob, with what he calls the animé on violins and viols, which is almost certainly this ornament. It can be a very, very quick ornament. So if we take this example from Maret's Grand Ballet, we see the battement, the little X, in two different places, both fairly brief. The opening half bar it appears on a crotchet, and then 3 bars later it appears on a quaver. So we've already heard that this needs to be a quick ornament, which in its basic form is the written note, the note below it, and the written note again. So we can deduce that it must be played something like this. So it's very simple, but very quickly. However, in pieces with much more intense passions, such as Maret's Tombeau pour Monsieur Méliton, where the opening very long note is ornamented by a battement, we know that we can repeat the battement multiple times, potentially, according to Danvy, for a good chunk of the duration of the note. Now, we know that the battement must always end very quick, and we know that it must always end on the fret, which is to say, on the note that is written. But this ornament was tied very closely, as with the vibrato, to the trill, and it is essentially a form of trill. So it's entirely likely that the battement would have been rhythmically altered such that it increases in speed as it goes, just like with the trill with the lean. We might be able to do the same with the battement, and indeed at the beginning of this tombeau, it's very effective to wind up the speed and thus the intensity of the repetitions of the battement. It can be really quite a useful expressive tool. The battement also appears very, very commonly as a termination, as a sort of ending for the port de voix, or what we usually call the appoggiatura, a leaning note. And we're going to look at this in more detail in the next video. But it's worth noting in this video, when we're looking at this particular ornament, that whenever you see a port de voix, the chances are it will have a cross over the main note, and that is because the composer intends the note to be ended. So we have two notes, the leaning note, the main note, and then the battement. And again, always finishing with the written note. But we'll look at this in the next video. I hope you found that useful. It was a quick and easy video for a relatively straightforward ornament. If you have any questions, you can leave me a comment in the chat box below. Please consider pressing the like and subscribe button. It really helps me. And I will see you in the next video.